Chapter 26. The Wide World of Jhana. Typically, the word jhana is used to refer to the stages of concentration, unless you read the old texts very carefully, such as MN 111, and then you realize that sometimes it is used to refer to the stages of insight. This has caused endless confusion for at least 2,500 years, but it can end here today, or at least I dream it can. Basically, there is a very natural way that attention progresses as we develop our abilities to pay attention, shifting through very predictable ways of experiencing the world. The jhanas become more concentration-like the more we pay attention to the specifics, steadiness, sense of continuity, and positive mental qualities that strong attention generates. The jhanas become more insight-like the more we pay attention to the three characteristics of whatever arises. To differentiate these two general flavors of the jhanas, I will here call them the shamatha jhanas, or concentration states, when those states are more seemingly stable, peaceful, pleasant, etc., and call them vipassana jhanas, or insight stages, when discussing those that are more three characteristics heavy. There are individuals who dislike using the term vipassana jhanas, but hopefully by the end of this book, and with good practice, you will see why thinking of it this way can be beneficial and useful. Those who think they can and should avoid the shamatha jhanas may be annoyed that I use the jhanas to describe aspects of the stages of insight. Very traditional shamatha jhana practitioners, with a love of the Pali Canon and a disagreement with commentaries such as The Path of Purification and The Path of Freedom, will probably feel that by adding the concept of vipassana jhanas, I am guilty of corrupting young minds and should promptly drink hemlock or some polite Buddhist equivalent, such as oversteeped green tea. I personally feel that the use of this concept of vipassana jhanas is more integrative and in keeping with the spirit of the original texts. But I fully understand why some disagree with me on this, and I believe I understand where they are coming from. Please note that I will not always specify what type of jhana I am referring to, as seeing vipassana jhana or shamatha jhana again and again in the same paragraph can be tiring, so sometimes I will just say jhana. And the context of the paragraph should always be enough to tell you which type I am discussing. As the differences in emphasis imply, these fundamental jhanic modes of attention can superficially appear quite different if they arise using different techniques, different objects of meditation, or if they occur at varying depths of development or with varying aspects being emphasized. Thus, jhanas that arise in relation to these various factors can appear to be so different that it may seem preposterous to think that they could possibly be related. If you pay attention to one aspect strongly, other aspects may be much less obvious or seem entirely absent. Each of the jhanas is like a forest that may appear very different at night or in daylight, in winter or summer, as viewed with a magnifying glass or from space, from the window of a passing car, or from the eyes of a bug crawling on the ground. Same forest, very different experience. However, I can tell you definitively, having crossed up and down them thousands of times over many years and in many different contexts, using many different meditation objects and levels of concentration, that using the jhanas as a basic framework for understanding what is going on and how to advance is extremely useful, practical, and empowering. To know them well is to know something profound about the core mechanics of how attention works and develops, as well as the vast range of amazing things we can do with attention. One of the issues that complicates using the jhanas to describe the wide range of meditative territory is that there is much confusion about the differences and similarities between concentration practices and insight practices. While I'm going to take a moment to disambiguate the two, in practice, things are not so black and white. While we may speak of the ideal of pure concentration practice or pure insight practice, what happens essentially involves some mix or overlap, however subtle at times, of both concentration and insight factors, regardless of which one we are trying to do. Some natural degree of alternating between them, even as we try to stay to one side or the other of this territory, is par for the course. And thus we find that the differentiation between concentration and insight is more about shades of gray than it is black and white. Please forgive the number of times I repeat that point, as it's an important one. Instead of talking about concentration versus insight as an axis, it may be more appropriate to speak of it as a two-dimensional plane, with the degree of concentration and insight each being separate perpendicular axes. When we have lots of concentration, but not as much insight, things are more smooth and enjoyable and/or peaceful. When we have more insight without as much concentration, things are vibrational and analytical, but often less pleasant. When both are present strongly, our practice may be both enjoyable and analytical and vibrational. When we have neither much concentration nor much insight, our minds are as they typically are. We can, at any moment, fall anywhere on that plane. Some traditions emphasize developing the axes independently, and other traditions emphasize developing both together. In this section, I will describe the axes as distinct, but as we saw in the 7 Factors of Awakening, they only really differ by one factor, that of investigation, which we emphasize when we wish to develop insight, and de-emphasize when developing concentration. Both insight and concentration practices, done well, develop all the other 6 factors of mindfulness, energy, rapture, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. At least in theory, concentration practices are a meditation on a concept, or a seemingly continuous aggregate of many transient sensations, whereas insight practice is meditation on the transient sensations as they are. When doing concentration practices, we consciously focus our attention on a specific concentration state. While reality cannot be frozen in this way, the illusion of solidity, continuity, and stability certainly can be cultivated to still attention. This is concentration practice. The various progressive states that are then obtained by doing this are called absorptions, shamatha jhanas, or dhyanas. Early English translations of the Pali canonical literature use the term trances. The term samadhi is used by some traditions to express any of the concentration states, with some terms added to qualify the degree of samadhi, while other traditions use the term only to refer to very high attainments that contain elements of both concentration and insight. I personally use samadhi to mean concentration states, but if you run into people who use the term the other way, hopefully there will now be no confusion or conflict. As stated in Part 1, insight practices are designed to penetrate the 3 illusions of permanence, satisfactoriness, and separate self, that is, to realize the truths of impermanence, dissatisfactoriness, and non-self, to attain the various irreversible perceptual transformations that are in this tradition referred to as awakening. Insight practices, various types of vipassana, dzogchen, zazen, etc., lead to the progressive stages of insight through various emphases, may color how these present in relative terms. Insight practices tend to be difficult, disconcerting, and at times destabilizing, as they are designed to deconstruct our deluded and dearly held views of the world and ourselves, though they can sometimes be outrageously blissful for frustratingly short periods. Concentration states are generally some permutation of great fun, extremely fascinating, seductive, spacious, blissful, peaceful, spectacular, addictive, etc. There is no limit to how interesting concentration practices can be. Insight stages and revelations can also be very interesting, but are not potentially addictive the way concentration states and side effects can be. Insight practices tend to be hard work most of the time, even if that work is just surrendering to and perceiving sensations as they are. A fact that highlights one of the oddest tensions in the world of insight. One of the factors that add to the confusion is that the concentration state terminology, jhanas, is used in the Pali Canon to describe both the progressively more advanced concentration states and the progress of insight, with little disambiguation. This was solved to some degree about 100 to 300 years after the earliest texts in the Pali Canon were written down, when the stages of insight were articulated in the Abhidhamma and commentaries to the canonical texts, but the original problem was not explicitly mentioned. It was only in the second half of the 20th century that the problem was sorted out to some degree by Burmese scholar monks, particularly Sayadaw U Pandita. Bill Hamilton and some of those whom he influenced, such as Kenneth Folk and myself, have developed this more in the last 20 years or so, such that we now have a robust, rich, phenomenological lexicon detailing clearly and deeply what came before. Concentration practices develop concentration, but they don't on their own yield insight or wisdom, except sometimes by accident. The problem is that concentration states can easily fool practitioners into concluding that these states constitute the end goal of the spiritual path, because they can be so blissful, spacious, and even formless, and thus can closely resemble the imprecise description of what awakening might be like. Being extremely pleasant, as the shamatha jhanas are, the results of concentration practices can, as mentioned, have a sticky or addictive quality to them. It is easy to get stuck in the habit of dropping into them and staying there for very long periods of time, such that if you wish to shift to insight practices, you find the draw of blissful concentration practices preventing that. When we are very clear about which side of our experience is more related to concentration practice and which to insight practice, an understanding that is not so easy to come by, focusing on the concentration practice side of practice can be helpful for the insight practitioner. In fact, some schools of meditation, such as many from Sri Lanka, consider strong concentration skills to be essential prerequisites for insight practices. I didn't happen to initially train in one of those schools, but they are out there and have valid points to make about the benefits of the concentration first approach. All the concentration states strengthen, stabilize, steady, and calm the mind, and this has 4 primary benefits. First, just as a video camera that is shaking wildly cannot produce a clearly visible video, so a mind that can't remain settled on an object will not clearly perceive its ultimate truth. Second, as concentration states cultivate deep clarity and stability on content, albeit very refined content, they are very useful for promoting deep healing and psychological insights. In other words, if you want to become aware of your stuff, do concentration practices, particularly with a focus on mental objects such as mantras rather than physical ones such as the breath. Not that breath-based meditations can't also bring up our psychological issues. Third, concentration states can be a welcome and valid vacation from stress, providing periods of profound relaxation and peace that can be an extremely important part of a sane, compassionate, and healthy lifestyle. Concentration states temporarily suppress the hindrances, all of which are stressful. Temporarily suppressing the hindrances in this way is considered extremely skillful. The Buddha highly praised those who had mastery of the concentration states, and this should serve as a reminder to those who dismiss or underestimate their great value or mistakenly feel that enjoying our life is somehow unspiritual. Fourth, concentration practices can help insight practitioners maintain powerful mental stability, as old habitual concepts about themselves and all existence are dismantled and raised by insight practice. However, if these concentration states end up blocking our ability to gain insight by solidifying a sense of self or creating aversion to experience suffering clearly, then they can become a significant and dangerous lofty kind of hindrance. Pleasurable hindrances that come from spiritual practice are traditionally referred to as golden chains. This is a very tricky balance. As the Insight First schools rightly point out, if we cling to stability, fluidity, or the positive qualities that concentration-heavy practice develops, we will not make progress in insight. However, as the Concentration First schools rightly point out, by plunging straight away into the fast and harsh vibratory experiences of insight practice without the mental strength, stability, and soothing effects of concentration practice to help stay grounded, we can become what are referred to as dry insight workers in the old commentaries. Dry insight workers have an unfortunate tendency to become uptight, irascible, emotionally brittle, and occasionally insufferable to be around, as if they were on speed or having a bad acid trip. In recent years, and by participating in online forums of hardcore practitioners, I have seen literally hundreds of examples of those who simply ran too dry, too hard, for too long, and completely fried themselves. Please do everything possible to avoid this. You won't reach your goals quicker, or at all, if you can't pace yourself or handle the territory. Forcing is not only imbalanced but also dangerous, as it can cause a person to give up practice for a long time, or perhaps for the rest of that lifetime. Take in the implications of that for a moment. I have also met plenty of people who just got stuck in the concentration states, as these were just such a great high that they lost all motivation or incentive to look for anything else, much like those finding themselves in the poppy field in The Wizard of Oz. A fancier high, but also a dead end, with possible repercussions for your longer-term evolution. Therefore, I refer to practitioners stuck in concentration states as jhana junkies. Sometimes spiritual openings can be extreme and dramatic, and being able to intentionally slow our practice down and calm ourselves can be very useful and skillful if we must deal with being actively engaged in the real world and also with these openings at the same time. In short, if you want to temporarily postpone your insight practice because you need to collect yourself so as to be able to get on with your life, or not completely flip out, such as to study for medical school boards, one way to do this is to train well in concentration states, and this can be very skillful postponement that can also become a period of crucial integration. Adding to this, some formal resolutions to first stabilize the mind with concentration before overdoing it in insight practices is a very skillful and wise long-term investment. That said, I ran pretty dry for a long time, and it made for very fast, if jarring, progress. It is not that I didn't learn and practice the jhanas, as I did, but most of my practice was very focused on the three characteristics. It is likely that during that period, I traded some degree of development on the axis of emotional maturation and psychology for rapid development on the axes of phenomenology and insight. While I am happy with my personal choices, it is not easy as an author to know how best to advocate for any individual practitioner reader, such as yourself, particularly how to advise on the wet versus dry approaches, and how to balance and alternate between them. This is best done by you, in close coordination with those who know your practice and who know well the path for themselves, as well as how to skillfully navigate the pros and cons of more insight-heavy or concentration-heavy practice. A mix of your own sense of how things are going and what the pros and cons of a more wet versus dry approach, coupled with skillful external human support, is often required to optimally balance these complex issues in real time, as things change all the time in our practices. Back to the jhanas. Each of the jhanas has its subparts, as mentioned briefly in the previous chapter, referred to here as subjhanas. These subjhanas can be further sliced into sub-subjhanas, etc. Because I am not at all above extreme geekery, at points I will go there when I feel it helps explain various phases of practice and various experiences that can arise. Hopefully, you will come to appreciate the elegance of this system of classifying experience. That said, there is a vast range of strange and interesting experiences that can occur spontaneously and/or because of strong mental development that may not easily fit into any system, so beware of trying to fit every single experience into any model, which can be tempting when people begin to learn a new way of thinking about things. One of the four imponderables, or the achinteya, as described by the Buddha in the Achintita Sutta, in the Anguttara Nikaya, AN 4.77, is the depths of meditation, meaning that ultimately the depths of jhana are beyond mapping. The other three of the four imponderables are the breadth and scope of the mind of a Buddha, the precise workings of karma, and conjecture about the origin of the universe. That said, the maps still have a lot to offer. I will start with a basic description of each of the jhanas in their more generic aspects, identifying their essential characteristics so that they can be recognized regardless of the type of meditation being done. I realize that some practitioners are not going to like my descriptions, as they have come to think of these things some other way. Please hear me out, and hopefully you will see why this system has its uses. While all this theory can get a bit complicated, and people looking for something simpler may find all this off-putting, I have found that meditation is a specialty that responds well to edifying content and to deep, rich, accurate, and nuanced Dharma theory. The detailed description of meditative territory is worthwhile, and its practical mastery many times more so. Thus, I will not hold back in letting fly technical lingo and theory. And for those who wish to gain true technical mastery of the wide range of what is possible, you have come to the right place.